All right, we are studying the book of Judges in our Sunday morning Bible class, and James told me that he got through most of Samson last time, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I did want to talk briefly about the parallels and contrasts between Samson and Jesus, and I think that there's a number of important parallels that's pretty hard to ignore. You think about it, both Samson and Jesus have their birth announced by angels. There's only 4 people in the Bible that actually have their birth announced by angels: Isaac, John the Baptist, Jesus, and Samson. Both of them become unwanted saviors of their people. You may notice that in the Judges cycle of Samson, there's a sort of a part of that cycle that's missing. You notice Israel sins, they are oppressed, and what do you expect the next thing to happen is? Yeah, but there's no record of them crying out for deliverance in the Samson cycle in Judges chapter 13. Rather, God simply sends them a deliverer without them asking for it. Samson is in some ways the unwanted savior of his people, much as Christ was the savior that humanity ultimately did not really ask for, and ultimately that humanity didn't really want because they crucified him. Both of them are filled with the Spirit of God and did amazing works. You'll notice Samson is one of the few people who he has the Spirit of God comes upon him more than anybody else in the book of Judges. And yet, what we see is he's not exactly of impeccable character, but the Spirit empowers him to do great things. He's one of the few, maybe even the only instance in the Bible where somebody is given superhuman strength because of the Spirit coming upon him. Both of them, of course, were bound and betrayed by their own people. Both of them were sold for a substantial amount of silver. Both of them were mocked by their captors before their death, and both of them have their greatest accomplishment in their death. You notice one of the last things it says about Samson is in chapter 16 and verse 30, that the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed at his life. Now Jesus, it's a little different. With Jesus, it's the number that he saved with his death are more than the number he saved during the span of his life on earth. That's true. Jesus performed a number of miracles throughout his ministry. He healed thousands upon thousands, but his death was his greatest accomplishment because his blood had a saving effect for all of mankind, ultimately. Now, there are several crucial differences between Jesus and Samson, though, and I'll bet you can probably think of some of what they are. Every time I suggest that Samson is a type of Jesus, there's always the inevitable objection, well, Samson and Jesus aren't anything alike. Look at them. They're completely different character, right? You think about it, there's truth to that. Samson lived a life of fleshly indulgence. Jesus did not. He was tempted in all things as we are, and yet without sin. Mark.
I'm going to acquiesce something publicly here. Argue privately. By definition, yes.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I think you're right to notice that there are differences between them, though. When I first heard this, that was my initial reaction too. Is like, really, Samson foreshadows Jesus? And there's enough similarities, I think, to make a case for it. But there's several crucial differences. There's a real twist on it. Samson, he suffers for his own sins. Jesus suffers for the sins of others. Samson, he dies. What does he die doing? He dies killing his enemies, but what does he say? What is his motive for the whole thing? Revenge, yes. Samson, one of the last thing he prays before he dies is, "O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may at once be avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Yes, Jen? Yes, they did. They both died with their arms outstretched. Someone pointed that out to me. It might have been you that pointed that out before. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's kind of interesting to note that as well. Samson's outstretched arms between the pillars foreshadow the outstretched arms of Jesus on the cross. I'm not going to make too much of that, but that is interesting to think about. Samson, of course, dies praying for vengeance. Jesus dies praying for something else. What does he die praying for? Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And Samson's death killed many of his enemies, while Jesus' death saved many of his enemies. And I think we can learn an important lesson from this, and the lesson is this. God can use anyone He wants. God can use any unpleasant person He wants. God can use anyone, no matter how wicked they may live their life. God can use them to accomplish His purpose. Because isn't that what He does with each of us? You think about it? I mean, we are all vile, wretched sinners. We all are without hope, and yet He presents us with the choice of being filled with His Spirit. He gives us the hope, and He uses us for His purpose. What Samson is what we become, ultimately.
I've mentioned this, Samson lived his life well. His parents hit that Philistine.
Yes.
Jesus, so on throughout his life. Jesus, John 17, prayed to the Father, essentially said, I have lived my entire life in your will.
Right. Jesus does nothing except that the Father grants it of Him. That's right. And, I mean, the power that Samson demonstrates, I think, shows what we're capable of. Not literally, physically. I mean, we're not going to go lift up the gates of, several tons gates of a city and carry them 40 miles all the way to Hebron. That's not what we're talking about. But we can conquer any foe as long as the Spirit of God is with us. And God gives His Spirit even to the most unpleasant of people. And so I think that that's the basic point that we're supposed to take away from this whole thing, is that, whose path are we going to follow? God is going to use us one way or another, whether we are wicked or whether we are good. God will use us. The question is whether we will choose to serve Him willingly or whether we will be in a bad situation like Samson, taking vengeance on our enemies and our death. Okay. There's probably a lot more points that could get made from the Samson story that weren't made, but I'll just kind of open the floor for comments or questions here before we move on. All right, okay. Samson was covered so perfectly that we'll never need to talk about him again. Thank you, James. That was very good. All right, Judges chapter 17, and really from this point, Judges 17 through 21 is kind of the book's epilogue. Remember I said at the beginning of the class that Judges can be broken into 3 parts. There's an introductory section from chapter 1:1 all the way down to chapter 3, verse 6, which kind of just explains the situation behind the book, the cycle of the judges, which is really more of a downward spiral, and the situations that Israel gets themselves into. The Lord saying, I'm going to make all the nations around you thorns in your sides and pricks in your eyes. Then there's the main body of the book, if you will, chapter 3, verse 7, all the way to the end of chapter 16, which goes through the 6 main judges cycles. Now there's a lot more than 6 judges, but there's 6 cycles. There's Othniel, Ehud, Deborah and Barak together, and then you have Gideon and Jephthah and Samson. There's also Abimelech, who really isn't so much a cycle, so much as he is the aftermath of Gideon. But that's the main body of the book. And then chapters 17 through 21, kind of the epilogue. And the whole theme of this book throughout, what have we been saying since the beginning is the main theme of the book of Judges? Do we remember? Yes, Jen. The Canaanization of Israel. That's not an expression that's original to me, but the idea that Israel, that sought to conquer the Canaanites and drive them out and destroy them, has become so thoroughly Canaanized themselves. They have become utterly like the people they have sought to destroy. And that is the main point of Judges 17 through 21, is we're going to see how thoroughly Canaanized Israel is. These are not happy chapters. This is not going to be uplifting devotional reading that we're about to do, but this is a necessary part of their history. Don. They were told to destroy. They didn't do a very good job seeking to destroy. That's a good point, Don. And so there's 2 main stories in these chapters. One of them in chapters 17 and 18 focus on Micah and his idols. And chapters 19 through 21 focus on the story of the Levite and his concubine. Now this section is punctuated with the familiar phrase, in those days there was no king in Israel. You see it in chapter 17 and verse 6, chapter 18 verse 1, 19 verse 1, and 21 verses 25. And twice an additional phrase is added. There was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Yes?
I think oftentimes
well, if you make my point for me, you'll save me the trouble.
who was supposed to be Israel? Not Saul, not anyone that followed him. God was supposed to be.
Yes.
There was no king in Israel. They did not follow.
Yes, that's true. I mean, and there's a whole other lesson in this in and of itself, how Israel, they eventually demand a king because they think a king is going to solve their problems. Does it? Well, no. Because after they get a king, what do? They continue to do what is right in their own eyes. They continue to do what was right in the king's eyes. Israel continues to say, oh, well, a king, that'll solve the problems. Well, a king would solve the problems if it were the king that God chooses. That's the problem. God himself must ultimately be their king. The problem is they don't want that. You see, even in John 19, Pilate puts Jesus up before them. He says, behold your king. We don't want him for a king. Well, you want me to crucify your king? We have no king but Caesar. The same problem, fundamentally, that's going on there. James. They don't want him as their king until they get in trouble. That's what it really is. Bail us out. Bail us out. Yes. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, the two stories here, they both begin with a reference to the hill country of Ephraim. You'll see that in 17:1 and 19:1. They both also contain a reference to Bethlehem and Judah. Both stories involve an unnamed Levite. Although technically the first Levite, you find out his name at the end of the story, but both stories kind of follow the exploits of a certain Levite. And both stories involve situations where Canaanite sins get compounded on top of each other. In the first one, Micah steals silver from his mother, then confesses to it, then he makes an idol out of the silver, then he recruits a Levite to work for him as his own personal priest so that he can continue worshiping this silver idol in his home cult. Then he has his idols and this Levite stolen from him by the Danites, who basically planned to start their own idol cult in a city way far to the north of the inheritance that God had chosen for them. It's like, you ever hear the expression, 2 wrongs don't make a right? Well, this is like 3, 4, 5 wrongs on top of each other. Nothing's making a right here. It's all bad. In the second story is even worse, I think. A Levite's concubine plays the harlot, then he has to go and retrieve her, and then on his return journey, they stop at Gibeah, where a community of men surrounds the house and demands that the visitors come out so that they can gang rape them. Sounds exactly like Sodom and Gomorrah. Instead, what the Levite does is he gives his concubine to them. They rape her all throughout the night until she's dead. The Levite comes out, finds her, cuts her into pieces, sends her throughout Israel to recruit them for war so that they can attack the city and destroy it. They wind up destroying almost the entire tribe of Benjamin in the process and have to then steal women from Jabesh Gilead in order to repopulate Benjamin. Is the situation in Israel bad? The situation in Israel is very bad. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. You see what doing what is right in your own eyes gets you? This is not feel-good devotional material. Let's pick up reading in chapter 17. Now there was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. He said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse in my hearing, behold, the silver is with me. I took it. And the mother said, blessed be my son by the Lord. Then he returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. His mother said, I wholly dedicate this silver from my hand to the Lord, for my son to make a graven image and a molten image. Now therefore I will return them to you. So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave them to the silversmith, who made them into a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and a household idols, and consecrated one of his sons that he might become his priest. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. What is wrong with this picture? Everything. Let's list it off. Jen. Didn't she promise all the silver? I will wholly dedicate this 1,100 pieces of silver to the Lord by giving only 200 of it to the making of this idol. Done. Yeah, exactly. This is kind of a warped view of worship, and the word there for Lord is Yahweh, but we're not going to we're going to make a molten image and worship Yahweh that way.
Easier to say what is right with this. One thing that's right.
Oh, what's right with the picture?
Mother asked, who stole my silver? And the son says, I did.
Oh, he owns up to his sin. Isn't that sweet?
That's it.
Yeah, which of course, but even then, look at it. What was her reaction when the silver was stolen? She uttered a curse in his hearing. I proclaim a curse on whoever stole my silver. As soon as he returns the silver, what does she say? Huh? She revokes the curse. Oh, blessed is my son of the Lord. She just kind of does whatever she wants, back and forth, all over the place. This is like most mothers. I guess she's, it's her own children. She has a weakness for them, and so, in this particular instance, she's just totally fickle with them. In that instance. And she immediately pronounces a blessing on Micah when he reveals the stolen silver. Yes, Jen? And then she gives him, and then she gives it back. Yeah, here, let's give you the silver so you can make an idol, a graven image and a molten image. You know, it's interesting, Deuteronomy 27:15 pronounces a curse. Cursed is anyone who makes a graven image or a molten image and sets it up in secret. But there you go. Her curse comes true, just not the way that she had intended. You know, he does something that makes him cursed by God. Micah's mother wholly dedicates the money. He makes an ephod. It sounds kind of like Gideon. Yes, James?
Wow. But he goes through with it.
Yeah, it doesn't. We're not even keeping our vows anymore. You know, we're making bad vows. Now we're just making vows at random and not keeping them. You know, so there's another problem. You can see how far the situation in Israel has come. But admittedly, you know, Micah is an isolated incident, except for what it says in verse 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Does anybody know where else that expression appears in the Bible besides in Judges? I guess not. Deuteronomy chapter 12. Deuteronomy chapter 12. The whole of Deuteronomy 12 is devoted to discussing basically the sanctuary laws. We're talking about, you know, where are you supposed to worship God? Can you worship God anywhere you feel like? Huh? No, not under the law of Moses. You cannot. I mean, now that changes with Jesus, but that's another discussion that we can get into later. You know, but in Deuteronomy 12, you don't worship at the high places. You don't worship at any cultic place you see. You worship God at the place that He chooses for His name to dwell. And in Deuteronomy chapter 12, in verse 8, it uses this expression, you shall not do at all what we are doing here today, every man doing what is right in his own eyes. For you have not yet come to the resting place and the inheritance which the Lord your God is giving you. And when you cross the Jordan and live in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and He gives you rest from all your enemies around you so that you live in security, then it shall come about that the place in which the Lord your God will choose for His name to dwell, there you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the contribution of your hand, and all your choice votive offerings which you will vow to the Lord. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levite who is within your gates, since he has no portion or inheritance with you. All right? I've met people before who try to interpret doing what is right in your own eyes as a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's never a good thing. Why? Because the law forbids it. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, you are not supposed to do that. You only worship God at one place. And what was that place? The place where He chooses for His name to dwell. At that point in Israel's history, anybody know where that was? It would have been at Shiloh, at the tabernacle was. Yeah. But Micah doesn't... Micah's not the tabernacle. He's over, it doesn't say exactly where he was. He's in the hill country of Ephraim, and he sets up a shrine in verse 5, literally a house of God, a Beth Elohim, which there's a little wordplay going on with that we'll talk about in a little bit. But basically Micah violates Deuteronomy 12 all the way around. He sets up his own idol temple. He sets up his own priesthood. Oh, we don't have a Levite, so we're not legitimate yet. Hey, but you know what? He solves that problem in verses 7 through 13. There was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite. And he was staying there. The man departed from the city, from Bethlehem in Judah, to stay wherever he might find a place. And as he made his journey, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. Micah said to him, where do you come from? And he said to him, I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to stay wherever I may find a place. Micah then said to him, dwell with me and be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, a suit of clothes, and your maintenance. So the Levite went in. And the Levite agreed to live with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know that the Lord will prosper me, seeing as I have a Levite for a priest. Oh, okay. So that makes it all better, right? Just like putting a Band-Aid on a tumor. It works perfectly. I keep seeing hand. All right. Somebody had a good...
I'll go first.
You'll go first. Whoever I saw first.
bottom line is, he wasn't any better off than Aaronic, apparently not of the Aaronic tribe. Aaronic, one of the sons of Aaron, that way, not all Levites were allowed to be
Yeah.
specifically included those not sons of
Yes, that's correct. And that's one of the things. It's kind of like, in Numbers chapter 18, it specifically says that not everybody is supposed to approach the Lord. The Levites can't just go in and out of the tabernacle as they please. It's the priests that do that. The Levites are simply to help and maintain that. But only the priests may draw near to the Lord to approach Him. That's the whole point of the story of the sons of Korah. The point of Korah's rebellion in Numbers 16 is that not all of you can come. Korah was a Levite. But when he demanded to approach the Lord, he was struck dead instead. Because he thought that, just take a little bit more than I'm presently allotted. So, in the strictest sense, no, this Levite's not a legitimate priest. The Levites did not have a specific land inheritance in Israel. This one was simply journeying to find a place to live. He eventually comes to the house of Micah. Micah recruits him, pays him, 10 pieces of silver a year, a change of clothes and other expenses, and the guy becomes like one of Micah's sons. Yes? God's going to prosper me because I sit in the right building and because I'm around a bunch of people that do all the right things. I must be therefore doing the right thing too. Well, no. If your heart is not right before the Lord, then none of that, that is like putting a Band-Aid on a tumor. You're right. And in this case, we have all this idolatry. Oh, but we got this one thing over here right. Look at me, Lord. I've legitimized myself. Well, the guys, then there's, of course, the whole problem of, thinking that he would be justified by that sort of thing anyway. Yes, Mark.
the second statement, I want to dwell wherever I can find a place. God had set up cities of refuge, places for Christ to live, and He had left those places, going to find a place to live. And bottom line, this is kind of like, well, all right, this particular story happened. This woman was all upset because her husband was adultery. And I kind of felt sorry for her until I found out he had done the same thing to her first husband. He had done the same thing to his first wife. Why would a woman think that a man is going to be faithful to her when he's not faithful to his first wife? And so this Levite is kind of like that. He's not faithful to God. Why would Micah think that he's going to be faithful to God if I pay him silver? Why would Micah think he's going to be faithful to me if he's wandering around trying to find the best deal for himself, and the better deal comes along? Why wouldn't he think?
Well, now, to be fair, I could see verse 9 going either way. I mean, maybe he's just looking for... There's nothing in that statement to rule out the possibility he's looking for a place among the Levite cities. But, I could see your point. I can see that going either way. Okay, I saw Don's hand. Right. Yeah, it's... And again, there's always there is the possibility of a righteous remnant within God's people somehow, every man can just be, everybody does this, blah, blah, blah. Well, we use that expression in English even, don't literally mean every single person. We obviously exclude ourselves in some instances like that. Jenna, I saw Jenna. It would be the Levite becoming like one of Micah's sons. Oh! You know what? I think I may have had that backwards. I had it written backwards on my outline. Oh well. Yeah, I don't know. You might be right about that. Yeah. Okay, I saw another hand. Oh, okay. All right. Chapter 18, because the story is not a great chapter division, but the story doesn't end here. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in. For until that day, an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. So the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of the whole number, valiant men from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said to them, "Go search the land." They came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. And when they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young man, the Levite, and they turned aside there and said to him, "Who brought you here? And what are you doing in this place? And what do you have here?" He said to them, "Thus and so has Micah done to me, and he has hired me, and I have become his priest." They said to him, "Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we are going will be prosperous." The priest said to them, "Go in peace. The way in which you are going has the Lord's approval." Now, the Danites are kind of traveling around, and it says they don't have any inheritance yet. Why not? They failed because of their lack of faith. Remember in Judges chapter 1 and verse 34, it was cataloging all those tribes that had a huge the list of tribes and how they didn't take their inheritance. Dan is at the bottom of that list. In verses 34 and 30 through 36, the Amorites forced the sons of Dan into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the valley. Yet the Amorites persisted in living in Mount Heres, in Aijalon, and in Shaalbim. But when the power of the house of Joseph grew strong, they became forced labor. The border of the Amorites ran from the ascent of Akrabim from Silla and upward. The Danites were actually forced out of their territory. In Judges 19, I think it says that the territory of the Danites proceeded beyond them, and they captured a city called Leshem. In Judges, Leshem is respelled as Laish, but it's the same city. And, we get that here in Judges chapter 18. They're hunting around for a place to live. The map is way, way over there, but, the Danite territory would be the little green area, in not the one on the bottom, but the one about a couple of spaces above that. And I don't know. This isn't a good example because not everybody can even see the map. I should have brought it out. But the Danite territory was supposed to be located in the south, just north of Judah, south of Ephraim. Instead, what winds up happening is the Danites don't possess that territory. They go all the way up to the north. They take a city far in the north of Israel, and they call that city Dan. And, so sometimes in the Bible you'll see the expression from Dan to Beersheba. That expression is talking about the northern and southern limits of Israel. Dan was at the northernmost city in Israel. Beersheba is way down at the south. It would like us saying from Washington to Florida or something like that. Or from Maine to California. Something, just extremities like that. From Dan to Beersheba is the northern and southern extremities of Israel. And so Dan becomes a very, very northern tribe. The Danites decide they need to send out spies. They figure out a different place to live. They find Micah's house. Micah's apparently not home for whatever reason. The Danites meet his priest and they ask him to inquire of God on their behalf. Never mind going to the tabernacle. Never mind not consulting graven images. We're going to get our answers from this Levite. He's obviously legit. The Levite inquires of the idols and determines that, hey, you're going to get Yahweh's approval. He's going to be with you. The 5 men departed and came to Laish. I'm picking up in verse 7. The 5 men departed and came to Laish and saw the people who were in it living in security after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. For there was no ruler humiliating them for anything in the land. They were far from the Sidonians. They had no dealings with anyone. They came back to their brothers in Zorah and Eshtaol. Their brothers said to them, "What do you report?" They said, "Arise, and let us go up against them. For we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And will you sit still? Do not delay to enter to possess the land. And when you enter, you will come to a secure people with a spacious land, for God has given it into your hand, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth." All right, so the Danites, they found their inheritance. We're going to take this. God's given it into our hand. They're very zealous for this. They weren't zealous to take their actual inheritance, but they were to take this city. These people are defenseless. Let's take them. Then, from the family of the Danites, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, 600 men armed with weapons of war set out. And they went up and camped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they called that place Mahinah Dan to this day. Behold, it is west of Kiriath Jearim. They passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. And then the 5 men who went to spy out the country of Laish said to their kinsmen, "Do you know that there are in these houses an ephod and household idols and a graven image and a molten image? Now therefore consider what you should do." They turned aside there and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, to the house of Micah, and asked him of his welfare. The 600 men, armed with their weapons of war, who were the sons of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. Now the 5 men who went to spy out the land went up and entered there, and took the graven image and the ephod and the household idols and the molten image, while the priests stood by the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with weapons of war. And when these went into Micah's house and took the graven image, the ephod and the household idols, and the molten image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" They said to him, "Be silent, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us. And be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or to be a priest to a tribe and a family in Israel?" The priest's heart was glad. He took the ephod and household idols and the graven image and went among the people. All right, so here we see, the Danites, they camp out at Mahana Dan, or the camp of Dan. They were real creative with their naming there. And they come to Micah's house. The spies interrupt the procession to point out that there's idols in the house. And of course, like anybody else who discovers there's idols in their house, their first inclination is to steal them. They're going to go in and take them by force. And then the Levite objects, and what's their response to his objection? Hey, come with us. We'll pay you. Hey, how would you like to be our priest instead of his priest? You get more money, you'll have more people, all this other stuff. Oh, okay. It was so easily bought. So easily bought because everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes. And the spies, 600 men, they come in with weapons by force. The Danites tell them, shut up and join us. Better to be a priest for a whole tribe's idol cult than just one man's home idol cult. More power, more money, more prestige. The priest is pleased to hear this offer, and he joins them and helps them rob the place. Aye. Oh, but the story's not over. Micah's not going to be happy about this when he finds out. Verse 21, they turned and departed. They put the little ones and the livestock and the valuables in front of them. And when they had gone some distance from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house assembled and overtook the sons of Dan. And they cried to the sons of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What's the matter with you that you've assembled together?" He said, "You've taken away my gods, which I made, and the priest, and have gone away. And what do I have besides? So how can you say to me, 'What's the matter with you?'" The sons of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, or else fierce men will fall upon you, and you will lose your life with the lives of your household." So the sons of Dan went on their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. It's just no honor among thieves, I guess. It's just more problems, one on top of the other. Micah resists the Danites. He pursues them. The Danites go, "Why are you following us?" "Because you stole my stuff. You stole my gods which I made, by the way." There's something a little off about that even, Instead of stealing the god. These gods, of course, were completely defenseless. There's kind of a satire on idolatry here. They couldn't stop themselves from being stolen. Also interesting that this father to his house, this great priest that he was so excited about, has now abandoned him. And the Danites' response is, "Shut up or we're going to kill you and your family." And so the Danites leave, and Micah is forced to abandon pursuit. He cannot outfight this army of 600 men. And so therein lies another great problem for Israel. Idolatry. And this is the great dishonor in Israel, that it's not just that we're making idols, but now we're stealing idols from each other, and we're threatening to kill each other over stealing these idols. So thoroughly Canaanized they have become. Well, they get to verse 27. They took what Micah had made, and the priest who had belonged to him, and came to Laish, to a people quiet and secure, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire. And there was no one to deliver them, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. It was in the valley which is near Beth Rehob, and they rebuilt the city and lived in it. They called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born in Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. So before it was, we're so far away from the Sidonians, nobody's ruling over us, it's all wonderful. Now here, we're so far away from the Sidonians that we can't cry for help. The city of Laish is destroyed. What was once their source of peace is now their source of destruction. The Danites capture the city, they rebuild it, and they rename it Dan after their father. And in verse 30, the sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's graven image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was at Shiloh. Now, verse 30 kind of reveals an interesting twist in the story, and it's one that not every translation gets. Let me ask you something. In verse 30, this priest's name is Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of... Huh? Yeah, some Bibles say Manasseh. Does anybody's Bible say Moses there? American Standard says Moses there. It said a footnote, Moses. Right. The problem is that, and this is one of those instances where there's almost certainly scribal tampering with the text. What it was that the Masoretes had this outrageous reverence for Moses, and they couldn't stand anything bad to be associated with Moses in any way. So they added a little letter, a nun, to make it spell Manasseh instead of Moses. There's only one letter difference between them in the Hebrew. And what wound up happening is, some Bibles followed the Masoretic reading of Manasseh because they just can't abandon that, but more likely Moses is the correct reading. Jonathan, the son of Gershom, and if you know Moses, you know that Gershom was one of Moses' sons. Which tells you something about how far Israel has fallen. That Moses, their great lawgiver, their great leader, in just a couple of generations, one of his descendants is already participating in this nonsense, this grand idol cult. The Levite's name is not told until the end of the story to surprise us. He was a descendant of God's servant, of his lawgiver, the one whom the Lord knew face to face. And now, not even the family of Moses has escaped the blight of apostasy that is gripping Israel. And worse, the idolatry persisted until when? How long did the idolatry persist? In verse 30. Until the day of the captivity of the land. Yes. Probably referring, this may hint at when, Judges was finally written or, edited or whatever. The tribes of northern Israel were carried off by the Assyrians into captivity during the 8th century, several centuries later. Which means that until they were carried into captivity, this never went away. This stayed there. That's the sad story about the tribe of Dan right there. Their idolatry never leaves them.
It's interesting that here Dan was established idol. Solomon was placed there.
Well, yeah, actually I wanted to talk about that. There's kind of a little irony here. All right? The Danites have the idols at the end of the story, right? But where are the idols at the beginning of the story? In Micah's shrine, or in his house of God, or, as I said before, his Beth Elohim. Right? There's kind of a little foreshadowed irony here, that this story contains idols at Bethel and Dan. And later on, Jeroboam sets up the very same thing, golden calves at Bethel and Dan. That's a little literary irony in the story for you right there. They're kind of foreshadowing what's going to happen later at Bethel and Dan. Just little trivia tidbit there. But yeah, that's an interesting thing to note. But in verse 31, and just very quickly conclude, they set up for themselves Micah's graven image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was at Shiloh. It wasn't like there wasn't a place to worship. And it wasn't like that place to worship was extraordinarily far away either. But all the time that there was a house of God at Shiloh, the place where the Lord chose for his name to dwell, the Danites had a house for themselves too, a house for their gods, where they could call for the people to worship. And it was not something that God approved of. It was something that man decided to do that was right in his own eyes. Be careful about adding to what the Lord has said and changing what the Lord has said in that respect. Okay, we are out of time. We got through chapter 18, so next time we will hopefully get into the Levite and his concubine, which is even less happy of a story.